Well, I'm extremely pleased to have been invited to contribute to the Turkish Publishing Assembly later this month. And what I'd like to do is to share some thoughts from here in London about copyright and licensing in these very unusual times in the middle of a global pandemic. You may know that the United Kingdom has been quite badly affected by the pandemic, and most publishers and literary agents are still working from home, haven't yet returned to their offices. So let's talk about copyright. I feel it's really important that in these very strange times, we don't lose sight of the importance of copyright. After all, it underpins our industry. It's essential for both publishers and authors. During the pandemic, there have already been a number of voluntary initiatives by publishers to make selected content available free of charge. These initiatives have ranged from scientific journal publishers allowing access to journal articles which are relevant for the pandemic. Educational publishers have made more content available free of charge online. And there have also been some initiatives from some very high-profile authors. For example, J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter books, is releasing a new fairy tale. It's called The Ickabog, in 34 episodes online free of charge. And she's invited children to provide illustrations for the book, which will be published in traditional print form later in the year by Hachette. But I think the point I'd like to make is that all these initiatives are voluntary. These are publishers and authors who've made gestures in recognition of the difficulty of these times. What we do need to avoid, I think, is a perception from users that content should be free of charge. Quite independently of the pandemic, I think publishing, or certainly some aspects of publishing, are already under attack from the anti-copyright lobby. And here in the United Kingdom, I'm not sure if it's a similar situation in Turkey, the academic sector is already under some stress because of the open access initiative. Here in the UK, this has become a government policy which risks undermining the traditional subscription model of academic journal publishing, which has always taken into account the value of copyright and also the value that publishers bring to content by arranging for peer review, selecting only the best material and providing editing services. So here in the UK, OA, open access, is now being extended to academic monographs, so to books as well as to journals. And it's dependent on the payment of article or book processing charges. This is really quite a dangerous development. It means that some authors may not have the funds to pay the charges if their institutions won't cover the cost. And there's also a concern that material is being published purely because fees are being paid and not because of the quality of the content, which normally publishers are crucial in selecting so that only the best content is produced. My own feeling is that open access monographs are unlikely to be viable. So this is a particular development in the United Kingdom, which undermines the concept of copyright. And I think that's a very dangerous situation. And of course, piracy hasn't gone away. It continues both in print form and online. And it has not been aided by a school of thought that during the pandemic, much more material should be available free of charge. You may be aware that the Association of American Publishers has recently taken legal action against the Internet Archive. That organization has made scans of the full text of over 1.3 million titles available free of charge during the pandemic. And many of those titles are recently published, and most of them are still in copyright. So again, an attack on the value of copyright, in some ways using the pandemic as an excuse to take copyright material and distribute it without the permission of the copyright holders free of charge. So let's move on to think about licensing, the question of buying and selling rights. Well, of course, the current situation is posing a lot of challenges. Publishers, along with other businesses, are facing a real battle to survive, and not all of them will succeed. Many of them are delaying publication of contracted titles. Some are cancelling contracts, and others are reducing the scale of their future publishing programs until the situation is clearer. And all of this, of course, affects our licensing business. The most immediate impact, of course, is the cancellation of international book fairs because of travel restrictions and concerns for the health of people who might be attending. The London Book Fair was cancelled at extremely short notice. And since then, the Bologna Fair, the Abu Dhabi Book Fair, and Book Expo have all been cancelled. I understand that at the moment, the Beijing Book Fair is intending to go ahead, but China has imposed a 14-day quarantine for foreign visitors. So it's most unlikely that the British contingent, British publishers are very strong supporters of the Beijing Book Fair, but that means that most of them will be unable to go because of the quarantine provisions. Frankfurt still intends to go ahead in October, but they accept it will be on a much reduced basis with very few American or Asian publishers attending. And already you are probably aware that most of the large English-speaking international publishers have said that they are not prepared to send staff, but that they will support Frankfurt's proposed online presence, which is still being discussed. So at the moment in the UK, we are barred from all but essential travel. And we also face a 14-day quarantine period when we return to the United Kingdom. So even if the Frankfurt Fair goes ahead in physical form, if these restrictions continue in the UK, many of us will be unable to attend. So all of this means that we've had to investigate alternative methods of keeping in touch with our rights partners, whether by email, by telephone, or increasingly through platforms such as Skype, Microsoft Teams, or Zoom. Rights colleagues report that this is how they've tackled their business in the aftermath of the London and Bologna fairs, but they found it time-consuming and in many ways difficult to present books on online platforms. One of my colleagues is about to run a course on presenting books online. So this is a learning period for all of us. I think we're having to adapt to technology as a substitute for our normal face-to-face meetings. Frankfurt is considering providing an online database where publishers can post up details of titles on offer, but this is also a very labor-intensive initiative, and perhaps it's best suited to non-fiction titles where potential buyers can search by topic. It's much harder to put information of that kind up online for picture books or fiction to make it searchable. So I think most rights sellers and buyers do recognize that this is really a rather poor substitute for meeting face-to-face. We all know that face-to-face meetings enable participants to build up those very important personal relationships, many of which last over many years. Also missing, I think, are those chance encounters where you spot a book as you walk down the aisle of a book fair, or perhaps you have a chance encounter with someone at the book fair or at a seminar or even at a party. So Frankfurt, I think, will be a major testing ground for how we can replace face-to-face meetings with online ways of doing business. Do I think the pandemic has led to different business models? Here, I think I have to state a very personal view. I've always been prepared to adapt license terms to individual circumstances, and obviously these are very difficult times. Over the years, I've undertaken many deals on the basis of what were purely token fees, which probably didn't cover the cost of administering the license once the author had received a share of the fee. But I'm also firmly of the belief that granting rights completely free of charge is not a very wise policy because of the message it sends concerning the value of intellectual property. There are also some rights sellers who are under hugely increased pressure to generate revenue in these difficult times. And some of those may be unwilling to make concessions on terms. So I think it's a question of choice. It may be the personal choice of the rights seller. It may be a policy of the company that they work for. But I hope that many of us will be prepared to make concessions during difficult times, but not to undermine the concept that a copyright work has some value. I wondered if there had been any positive results from the pandemic for rights sellers. Many of my colleagues report there is increased interest in books on cookery, gardening, dressmaking, craft work, exercise, and other topics which are interesting to people who are still locked down in their homes. So they are buying books about activities which they can carry on while the pandemic lasts. There is also increased interest in books on relaxation and mindfulness. And on the fiction front, crime books, adventure, fantasy are all popular. And also there is an increase of interest in large blockbusting books, such as Hilary Mantel's The Mirror and the Light, 800 pages plus. And there's a return to lengthy classical works such as War and Peace and À la recherche du temps perdu. People are feeling that while they're in lockdown, they have time to read those longer books they never had the chance to read before. In educational publishing, there has been a boom in books for children because they're still in the UK here at home, being homeschooled. So there has been an increase in factual books for homeschooling. Those books are perhaps not so suitable for licensing if they relate to a national curriculum, but also a boom in children's books generally, as parents try to make sure that their children are not glued to a computer screen or a tablet 24 hours a day. One of the things that we found is that Amazon initially didn't regard books as a key product. So for the first 2 weeks of our lockdown, books were not top of the list for Amazon to supply. They changed their minds and now they are doing very good book business. So all in all, I've got rather mixed views on the situation for copyright and licensing during these very troubled times. I do feel that this is not the time to devalue the importance of copyright. It underpins our business. It's vital to our authors as well as to us as publishers. On the licensing front, I'm sure we can be inventive with the use of technology, but I think all of us really are longing for the time when we can be back meeting our colleagues face to face, whether it's in our home country or whether it's at overseas book fairs. Personal contact, I think, is one of the best aspects of our industry. So thank you and all best wishes for the success of the Assembly.